Great keynote that was just given. We're talking a little bit about authenticity here, and just wanted to start maybe going down the line, both just quick introduction, but then also how you define authenticity, because we know it's a priority, but I think people have different definitions for it.
So I think you guys know me now. So the way we measure it is, what I discussed earlier, which is the number of brand connections. That is the most important thing we look at. But then the other thing that I mentioned less of is we also spend a lot of time looking at who these influencers work with, what other brands they work with, how many other brands they work with. There have been even people that we've started working with, and then as they get big, we see them taking on a lot of different brands, and we drop them because it starts feeling inauthentic.
Hi, my name is Juliette Leavey. I work at Deutsch on the digital strategy team. And the way that I would define influence or authenticity is really believability at the end of the day. I think that even when you go on these influencer profiles, it's very clear how genuine they are just by reading the comments really that are under it and how much people genuinely believe in what they're saying that they use and the brands that they're recommending. So for us, when we're looking at authentic influencers, it's really about finding the genuine ones to communicate your brand message in the right way.
Hi there, Andy Reichgut. I run a emerging natural frozen food brand called Veggies Made Great. Raise your hand if you've heard of it. Yep, so that's our problem. There's only about 15 of you guys out there who've heard of it. I spent 22 years in CPG, big food marketing at companies like M&M Mars, Pinnacle Foods, etc. And about 5.5 years ago, left to work on food that I was really proud of. So our brand, Veggies Made Great, the first ingredient in all of our food is a vegetable, but we create prepared foods in various formats to show people that veggies can taste amazing. Because we believe the one thing, no matter how far back you go, the one message about eating right that will never change is eat your veggies. And in this country, we have a big problem with that. So we're on a mission to get everybody to eat the veggies that they should. When it comes to authenticity, I think it's a really interesting question, especially you have to look at it the perspective of what you're marketing. When I was marketing Hungry Man frozen dinners or Vlasic pickles or Duncan Hines cake mix or Snickers, it's a very different approach of what is authentic, because those brands are not deemed as authentic. Maybe you could say Snickers is, but those brands are somewhat outdated and not what's relevant to especially the millennial and Gen Z. So when it comes to authenticity, we always look at it the perspective of what we're marketing. I think we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go.
Great. So I mean, hearing, and they're kind of similar. I think one thing that I'd love to talk about in terms of authenticity is not just any tools maybe that are used to track and measure it, but even if you see over time, and you mentioned a little bit as people grow, there might be a little bit less believability. But also, we've seen people that maybe started out with a certain niche that then had other brands work with them, and now all of a sudden they're in a brand new market. Talk a little bit about ways that you track the people you're working with, but also over time, and if you see shifts in authenticity.
So we track everyone we work with, I would say, from multiple fronts. So our agency helps us track it from a social listening, from a connection standpoint, from a obviously what we're getting out of them in terms of engagement and things like that. But I would say this is where, just being a team that kind of is really passionate about what we work on. All of us kind of are following stuff on Instagram. Not that I condone, working all hours of the night or weekends or whatnot, but we're just excited, and we all follow our influencers, and we'll see things anecdotally, and we'll be like, oh my God, she's working with such and such now, let's talk about it on Monday. So I think there's sort of like the science piece, and then there's just the art of, it's hard even as a marketing team to keep up with all the media and all that our influencers are doing. So, but between all of us in our agency, we sort of like keep a data eye on it and just the regular eye on it.
Yeah, I think that just to add to that for the science piece first, because I think your second point is much more interesting and true. But something we've seen help a lot is really just tracking engagement rate at the end of the day. A lot of these guys have, followers in the hundreds of thousands, but if they're only getting 100 likes, they've really lost that authenticity, is what we're seeing a lot of. So we found that that's almost like a really easy barometer that we can track against, and then also map our content to, because if our content is getting engagement at a lower rate than their typical content, that's also a sign that people aren't believing it, that we're true partners on something. But I think your point is so true, that really immersing yourself in the subculture that these influencers really do influence is really key, and is something that it's too hard to quantify, but it's so critical.
Great, and moving to touch a little bit, but I'd love to talk about just discovering authentic influencers. There's a lot of ways to go about it. We just heard a couple. Let's see preferred methods of discovery and ones that maybe haven't worked out so well. Anyone can.
I mean, we've taken the approach of test and learn. This is new ground for a lot of people, so we'll do a lot of small tests and emerge, and we found that the one metric to measure their success, engagement, reach, all those things, authenticity are great, but it comes down to purchase. And if you're ever spending marketing dollars and you're not doing it to drive purchase, you're not looking at the right metric. So for us, we have a e-commerce site which allows us to track purchase very easily, but the majority of our sales are in the usual suspects like Costco, Target, Kroger, etc. And the way we figured out to measure that is through store locator, coupon redemption, clip to card, and we've done some small tests in regional areas. So we'll boost an influencer post to a certain region in Indianapolis where we know we have good distribution in certain stores, and we get that syndicated data so we can measure it. So in the end, everything we do comes down to purchase, and we've actually found a lot of little interesting tidbits on what drives the best result, which gets back to the whole question of being authentic in the first place.
Great. So one thing, there's a lot of different ways to discover. I'd love to just know, in terms of the influencers you work with, are they, managing it themselves? Do they have one manager? Are they part of a talent agency? I think that there's a lot of different ways that it's being done now. We'd love to kind of go down the line and hear that.
So we see a lot of different, depending on who we work with, depends on how they run it. So for the makeup artists, especially the celebrity makeup artists that we work with, they generally work for an agency, and they have an agency repping them. So we're generally working with the agency just to set it up. But then we have one makeup artist that, she's one of our biggest. Her husband's her manager, so she hasn't wanted to go the agency route. And then we've had some that kind of manage themselves. So we've kind of seen it all. But I think the most important thing, no matter who it is just in order for the content to look authentic, I feel like the relationship between client, agency, and their agency has to really be authentic too. So if they feel good about working with Weleda, then their content looks better, and that in the end, obviously, we get better engagement and purchase.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there are certain activations where it makes sense to plug in influencers, where you'll naturally work with people who have more managers than others, like if you're hosting an event or something like that, typically, or even trying to sell a new product and really track that sale. Working with a network of influencers can be really helpful. They usually have access to a lot more data than just the influencers managing it themselves. I think though, what we're seeing a big rise in, and it's such a buzzword now, but the rise of the nano influencer, and the one that you really work with for a very long period of time. And those guys, from my history, typically just manage themselves. And then I think it is about working with them in the long term, so you can teach them also how to track their data in an interesting way and start mapping it to sales. It might not happen in the moment in a way that's really trackable, but that's the point of working with them on the long term, is to see, is that sort of like rising tide lifts all boats strategy.
Yeah, that's exactly what we've experienced. So we did a lot of large influencers with millions and millions of followers, and we've done people who have 15,000 or 10,000 followers, and we found the smaller ones are so much more effective. And the reach that they have is somewhat irrelevant, because what we have found is when someone sees a message about our brand, which by the way is very complicated. So our best-selling item is a chocolate muffin. That's a third vegetable, zucchini, carrots, the first two ingredients. It's gluten-free, it's nutritionally smart, and nobody buys frozen muffins to begin with, so it sounds really gross. It's a big hurdle to get over, but when someone tries it, they're absolutely amazed with how good it was. So what we found is working with small, very small influencers who are really authentic to a small group of people, we were then able to boost that to the relevant audiences that we were seeing, and they were super happy because we're building their following. And now we have some influencers who started with 10 to 15,000 and now have 500,000 followers because of us, and because we were an authentic brand, they were an authentic message, and that marriage worked perfectly.
So we'd love to hear, because I know, authenticity is obviously a big word right now. We also talk about, impact and results, which I've heard, across the panel too. I would love to know, is authenticity the #1 factor for impact, or are there other areas, that in terms of working with influencers that you've really seen make the biggest impact on your brands, and anyone can pick up on it?
So I would say an emphatic yes. I don't know. I mean, you might think you have impact. You might think the numbers, seem big, so that means impact. But and this is what Andy was just saying about working with, very large influencers but had less impact. I think authenticity is absolutely at the core, because that's why these people, got big, so to speak. It's because they were being authentic, and when you start using them in different ways, or they start not sounding like themselves, I mean, we just saw this morning about all the messages consumers get, all the things that they're bombarded with, and if they don't feel like a connection with it anymore, they're just very quick to drop it. So I think it's the most important.
I agree. I think authenticity is the reason you really work with these influencers at the end of the day. I mean, they definitely can drive sales, they definitely can drive traffic, but they're adding a level of credibility to your brand that it didn't have before. And if your main goal is traffic, some of that can purely be accomplished through paid media coming from your brand. But the influencers add another dimension to it that builds a real connection and really makes someone actually want to take that click and find out more.
Yeah, I would add that there's a study going on at the University of Chicago right now that talks about what's the most influential way for someone to receive a message: audio, video, or text. And audio is actually 15 times more effective than a visual or a text of this. So what we've done, which is really old school, we actually go to a bunch of gluten-free consumer events, we go to women's events across the country, and we get influencers by talking to them face-to-face. And you would be amazed with how much more impactful that is versus finding them online. And if you are going to try to find them online, call them, speak to them. It's unbelievable how much more impactful it really can be.
Great. I think, and to that point, if you're meeting people for the first time, does authenticity with influencers mean that they have to be a customer of the brand, or can they kind of go along with the journey and eventually become, someone who is a fan and customer of the brand?
Yeah, let me take that real quick. I think that's a great question, and it depends on where you are in your life cycle. So I was at an event last week where the old Kraft Heinz CMO was there, and she was talking about marketing Kraft mac and cheese and all these brands that are basically what many consumers, especially young consumers, deem what's wrong with food. And in that instance, it's much more difficult. You have to take a completely different approach. But for a brand like yours, which I can't pronounce, but it's very impressive, or Veggies Made Great, you have a discovery period of your life, and we're in that discovery period, and that's the most exciting for an influencer and a consumer. If they can be the one that discovers you and then they tell all your friends, they get value out of that. So it depends where you are in your life stage in terms of how you approach that.
So we'd love to hear a little bit about, and I think it's touched on a little bit, but just if there's one example of success from working with influencers and at what stage of the funnel it was at. And specifically, especially wanting to know, because it's a little bit more nuanced, if anyone has examples of driving to retail as well.
So for us, what we've just done with Skin Food and are doing right now with Skin Food and the line extensions is absolutely the best success we've had so far in our 1.5 years of marketing this brand. So the thing that's been successful about it is, one, that product happens to be one that, when I talked about Taryn Me earlier, that product actually marries beauty and wellness. So we're capturing an overarching, two key facets of our consumer target's life, which is 2 is better than 1. So she gets hit from both sides. The second thing is that the product has a story. So, authenticity, I think, also depends on the story you give these people. The product's been around since 1926. It stood the test of time. The brand, is nearly 100 years old. So that helps as well. And the way we've harnessed it is, this is the one where we had the least control over the messages. So we gave the influencers a lot of leeway in how they talked about it. And then the way we drove to retail is we had some events on, usage. We had an event at Story, which just opened up in Macy's in Herald Square. Story was featuring our product because the theme was green. And we actually got one of our influencers that's a makeup artist, a New York makeup artist. She actually attended the event. We did a sign up to come to the event, and she gave free makeup tips. It was, the Saturday before Easter, and the engagement was through the roof. There was a line of people down the street to meet her, and then it drove directly to that retailer. And we did the same. We've done the same thing at 2 Whole Foods as well. So we do try and link it as much as we can where it makes sense.
For one of our brands, we had an influencer activation where we worked with women in business, and specifically small business owners who were females, and it was really about connecting them to each other and celebrating the journey they were all on together. And that was one of the better campaigns I felt that I worked on, because I just thought there was something so true and genuine about it at its core. And ultimately, in connecting these women, the brand was also able to be useful to them and really help them. I think that it didn't so much have a retail component, but I definitely have seen a lot with hosting events with influencers that drives in-store. I think anything where you can create an experience, people also want to grow their influence. They will come to get a little bit of that ripple effect onto them as well. I do think, though, that it's really interesting to think about e-commerce as much as possible. People are really interested in convenience at this point, too, and now Instagram, Pinterest, Facebook are making it easier than ever for influencers to actually direct people to buy your product online and do so in a trackable way. So when it is possible, and definitely when it makes sense, it's something to consider as well.
So with the time we have, I'd love to talk about, kind of looking forward, whether it's and I'll let you choose which one, whether it's a challenge or an opportunity. What you see as either the biggest challenge or opportunity in influencer marketing, probably over the next 6 to 12 months. We start with Randi.
So I think the biggest, challenge / opportunity. So the biggest challenge is, and we've all seen it in the news about the influencer market is growing and there's going to be a crash and a correction, and I think that will happen. But for brands, and agencies that really make authenticity at the core, I think will sort of be unaffected, because I don't think people are going to stop being influenced by third parties. I don't see that happening in our digital world. I don't see that happening with our, all the technology that's coming. And I think it's going to grow even more. It's just so authenticity, I think, is really the key. Of if you can stay true to that, that's the biggest opportunity.
I think one of the big challenges we're struggling with right now, and I've read a couple e-marketer articles that seem to support it, is really finding the right ones. I mean, there are just infinite people on the internet at this point, and it would take too long to really comb through them, but there's always that nagging feeling like, is there someone else out there? So I feel like that's a challenge that we're still learning how to overcome. I think a lot of tools have come out that actually do like photo tracking now and things like that. You can much better protect your visual identity and really, really scour the internet to get to the right people. But with Facebook groups coming out, I mean, people and becoming much more popular, people are influenced by so many different things. So I think just the sheer volume is something that we're going to have to overcome. But I think a big opportunity is once you find the right ones, I think it's about co-creation together at a certain point too. If you have the right relationship built, can you partner on a product together? Can you design something together to really suit her audience? I think that really brings an influencer into your brand and gives them a stronger stake in it. And then ultimately that maps back to the believability as well.
Yeah, I agree with their risks. I think another opportunity is content creation. We utilize influencers as much to give us creative assets than anything else, because we are a small brand trying to spend every single dollar on working media, and they create amazing content. And I've actually seen a bunch of the influencer marketing agencies that I met a few years ago. One just changed their whole model from influencers to content creators. So I think that's a big opportunity going forward.
Okay. So just one more thing in terms of the challenges that I'd love to get everyone's quick take on is just in terms of the visibility of influencers. So the ability for influencers to reach those communities that they've built up. We've seen the impact of that on brands. I'd love to hear if you've, probably more so for any of the bigger influencers, but if you've, talked to them about it at all, or if you have ways that you're handling that.
Real quick, this is a CPG conversation, so if you're not online, everyone knows your biggest issue is you get on shelf at Target, it better start moving. Or if you're in Costco, it better start moving. So how do you utilize an influencer to get that immediate response from consumers so you're getting the velocity that you need to stay on shelf?
Great. All right, well, thank you all for participating in this.
Any questions from the audience? Honey. Yeah, bye.
Hi, Christopher O'Connor from Rise Alliance. In terms of influencers and those individuals maintaining the integrity that they need to have in order to be able to speak from a valid perspective with your consumers, how do you maintain a kind of church and state relationship with them so they're not coming across as being quote unquote in your pocket? And I know you've all got various different categories that you work in, and on the agency side working across a multiple number of brands, but I think that's obviously important to make sure that they're not perceived as being quote unquote paid off.
Definitely, and I think even we're seeing now, once you have something like hashtag spawn or hashtag ad in the copy, people automatically don't even trust it anymore, which is sort of tough to overcome. I think as much as possible, allowing them to show either being actually like swayed by a brand and now like a brand new muffin, trying it for the first time, and actually sharing that, oh my gosh, I didn't think I would love this, and I totally do. Like there's a genuine story to that as well that I think you can encourage the influencers to tell. I think something we try to coach our brands on a lot is to not try to control that narrative so much, because then I think you lose that church and state divide. As long as they're still communicating in a way that their followers have come to expect, that's the best way we've found so far to make sure that it still feels true to them.
I'll just follow up quickly on the church and state thing. The other piece of it that we look at is the idea of editorial versus sponsored. So influencers that still have, whether it's, there's no magic number, whether it's 70% is still things that they are talking about in organic, and then 30% sponsored content. There's some, we're still figuring out what that balance is, but certainly that's another piece of it as well.
I think the other key is that we can't do it for everyone. It depends how many influencers you work with. It's hard to engage them in the brand if you work with many. It'd be too taxing. But for the larger ones, we've invited them to our office. We've met them in person. The brand team has met them in person, and we create a relationship with them where, when we were launching this skin food, Katie Deno emailed me and said, what's the packaging made of? She felt like she could just come to us, and then when she actually just became the first Whole Foods beauty influencer last month, I looked at, I didn't even know. I knew that we had someone in common. I didn't know it was her. So I saw her on the Whole Foods Instagram feed, and she was picking up skin food and sort of like showing it. And I can tell you, Whole Foods buyer did not ask her to pick up skin food. I did not ask her to pick up skin food, but that's how it translates. When they feel like they have a relationship with the brand and they're not being treated as a, here, just I'll pay you and you post and I'll talk to you, 6 months from now. I think that goes a long way. It's like any relationship.
I just add, and that's actually a perfect example, because for me, you can tell. Consumers aren't stupid. They can tell if someone's saying, hey, this frozen lasagna that's been around for 50 years is amazing because, who cares? But when they have a new product that someone's authentically recommending because it is actually different and new and powerful, that's when you don't have to worry about the church and state, because it's an authentic message to begin with. When you're using influencers under a false pretense of something that's been around forever or is not meaningful, it won't work.
Joe Tam, I'm from Open Mind. We're at the media agency for Nestle. Andrew, you started to talk about this, and I'm curious to kind of get your perspective as well as the perspective of the panel on this. But when it comes to influencer marketing, it's particularly effective for new brands or influencers introducing or discovering new brands. What recommendations would you have for more legacy CPG brands where they're not necessarily an it brand that people are naturally talking about with the same level of, passion or fervor as kind of like newer brands? What thoughts do you guys have on that?
Look, if you're Nestle and you have Stouffer's and you have Sweet Earth is an authentic, new, emerging, powerful brand. And their message is going to come across from the influencer in a really powerful way. If you're Stouffer's and you're trying to use influencers to drive people to your new lasagna because it's got, I think I saw this yesterday, it's got 10% more meat, you better target that to people who really care. Because it, in my opinion, is looked upon, it hurts the influencer who's recommending that message, and it also hurts the brand for trying to make up a powerful message in a medium that, a weak message in a medium that should be only using really powerful messages. It comes down to, before there were influencers, there was word-of-mouth marketing. And there's an old Harvard Business Review study that talks about the one metric that drives the highest purchase intent is if consumers would say, I would recommend to a friend, more than anything else. So influencers are no different. You have to have a message that's rational for an influencer to share. If it's not, then it comes across as really fake, and I think it does more harm than good.
I think that's definitely true. I think there are heritage brands, though, out there that haven't really come forward with a true purpose and a true mission yet. And I think that we're actually seeing a lot of these old school brands really refreshing themselves as a whole. So I do think there's an opportunity, if your brand does have something compelling to say that they maybe just haven't said yet, that actually doing it with influencers and bringing that story to them and even vetting it with them. Because an influencer can tell you if it is really going to land or if it won't.
Back there.
Corey Bowler, Parmalat Media. How are podcasts factoring into your influencer strategy?
Well, that's a great question, because I believe podcasts are probably the most powerful way, other than someone recommending my brand to their friends, that we can do. If you listen, I listen to a lot of podcasts. If you take Revisionist History, for example, I was listening to one this weekend, and the host was talking about this product that I never heard of before. My wife was in the car with me, and she was like, wow, what's that? And there was probably 50 ads that they heard during this drive we had. It was during a drive to my parents' house. Happy Mother's Day, Mom. And that was the only one she heard. So I look at it as implied endorsement from someone that these people really trust. That's why they're listening to the podcast in the first place.
I think it speaks to your point earlier too about how audio really can have an impact too. I think podcasts are definitely an interesting place to play. I think you see though that a lot of these influencers out there who have true influence have a huge Instagram following, have a podcast, even run a blog sometimes, you know, work with these publications like you mentioned. So I think it's really about even have like an IGTV episodic series that they're running. I think it's about working with the person that's the true embodiment of your message and figuring out what's the best medium to deliver it then.
Yeah, we use podcasts in the same way. So we've dabbled with a few, but they've been with ones that are really tightly linked to the brand. So like Mind Body Green podcast or Lady Gang podcast. And we also try to, again, just engage the people doing the podcast so that they really understand, because the worst thing is when you're listening to a podcast and you're like, speaking of dry skin, oh, I tried Weleda. You know, that's not what you want. You want them to be genuinely excited about your brand, or else it just comes across as another ad, you know, that they have to say it to get the money so that they stay as a podcast.
Great job. Thank you, guys.